What's up, gamers? And I think Topaz is still a meta-defining unit and a character that will push the meta even further in the future because she does a lot, right, guys? Let's take a look at the chart right here. First of all, we already know one big thing Topaz does. That right there. Number two, what Topaz does. She's a cute little movie, little side character, but memes aside, she does a lot more than these two huge things right here, right? First of all, at her core, she is a follow-up character, right, guys? So let's just put that on the list here. She's a FUA character now, and with the FUA, who's actually doing it? That's going to be Noombi. And what is Noombi, guys? He is a summon. That means he is being summoned by Topaz onto the field, which is a type of follow-up that we've recently seen buffs for in the game. Take a look at this new set right here. It literally plays off of having summonable characters in the game, and this is a brand new set, meaning in the future we are going to be getting more units that play off of having summonable characters on the field. What's another big thing she does? She debuffs the enemies, right, guys? When she puts proof of debt on the enemy, she's gonna be debuffing the enemy with a 50% vulnerability debuff to follow-up attacks, right? But not only does she do debuff, not only does she do just follow-up damage in general, she also is going to be playing off of the amount of times that any other follow-up character hits the enemy on the field, and every single one of her attacks is considered a follow-up attack, guys. This means anyone that would play off of summons would potentially have the capability to slot in perfect with her, because not only are they getting a vulnerability debuff on the enemy, they're also getting additional follow-up attacks to help their summons go more often as well. What does this also mean? Unless you're the case of Jing Yuan, you really don't need much debuff resist on this team, which means you don't have to run Adventure on the team, because these summons or these follow-up attacks usually act independent of each other. Like I said, Jing Yuan doesn't count because if he gets stunned, the Lightning Lord gets stunned. But for every other summonable character, that is not the case for, right? So this is why Ling Shaw, I think, is a really good support for these characters. Now to combine everything into one package for you guys, what all of this does together, right? This is going to be playing to the future of a Honkai Star Rail, gamers, because that is where the meta is going, right? So really quickly, guys, I just want to go over this chart I made here. This is what I think the spectrum of follow-up characters is, and this is how I'm going to tell you why I think that she is going to be meta changing. First, we have summon type follow-up characters where all their moves are completely reliant on whatever their summon on the field is, whether that be Lightning Lord, Hu Yuan, whatever her little bunnies are, or Noombi, right? Then we have state reactive follow-up characters, meaning they need to be in a certain state or have a certain amount of things with them there to actually use their follow back. And then finally, we have reactive type follow-up characters. Now, I'll save a bigger breakdown for this in a full meta breaking video, just to quickly, briefly go over this though, right? I actually don't think Topaz necessarily sits fully in this category here. I more so think she kind of sits in the middle here, right? Because if we look on the spectrum here, these are quite different from these because these just kind of go off without a hitch. These go off needing an enemy hit, right? These over here, they need enemies to hit them to go off, whereas these right here are kind of the middle ground where they kind of need something to help them get their ability off, but it's not like that harsh of a requirement normally, right? So this is why I think that she kind of sits in the middle here, because while she is a summon, she kind of buffs the rest of these guys up here, which is kind of like the bread and butter for follow-up teams. This is where you see most of your main DPS for follow-up teams. They're literally state driven, right? So whatever state the enemy and or their team is in, or whatever you're doing with your team, this is how they are dealing their main types of damage, and that's normally why you see the biggest amounts of damage from these characters here. But the reason why I think she's going to be meta is because, first of all, she gives that vulnerability. She attacks frequently, which is what a lot of these later characters, like Fei Zhao, for example, they want a lot of actions to be in a state where they're able to get their ultimate off more often. So that already kind of makes her good there, right? But not only does she do this, like I mentioned, she's in the summon category. If we look at both these categories, these two sides have to grow here. I don't think we're going to keep growing down this main path here because this is the most balanced path. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail on this. If you guys want me to, I'll make a full video covering what my thoughts and analysis are on this. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. But the reason why I think that she's future-proofable and is going to be meta-defining in the future is because of her fact that she has a summon, right? So she kind of like rides this middle line in between what the actual meta is right now and what probably a lot of the meta will continue to be, but also to this summon meta as well, meaning she can kind of play both sides of the field, whereas I don't feel like either of these categories can really play both sides of the field, if you get what I'm saying here. So that's the most broad example I can give here without making this into a whole separate video because there's a lot to touch on here. I just kind of want to give you guys some juice, and if you enjoyed this section, make sure you hit that subscribe button now so we can go into further detail on this. But if you're excited for the future of Topaz and you just got her, let's go ahead and talk about her best in slot build now, because while I did make a build guide video a couple months ago, a lot of stuff has come to the game that actually makes her a lot better. So let's just go ahead and start with her light cone first. Guys, her light cone, best in slot light cone, is going to be worrisome blissful. Her signature light cone, this is absolutely amazing, hands down the best light cone that you can run on her. First of all, it's giving her crit rate, which she desperately needs. She gives herself a lot of crit damage in her kit. Not only does it give her crit rate though, it actually puts a debuff on the enemy that can stack up to 2 times, doing 24% more crit damage to that enemy as well, meaning this can be used for any other follow-up type character that you have on the team. They're going to be dealing 24% more crit damage to that enemy when you have this light cone equipped. Now, this is also going to be increasing her own follow-up damage by an extra 30%, so hands down, this is the best light cone you can run, but this is not the only light cone you can run, because she actually has a lot of other options you can use. Namely, she can use Dr. Ratio's light cone if you had that, but let's say you didn't have that signature light cone, right? Cruising in the Stellar Sea, absolutely free to play her light cone. This will be increasing her crit rate by 16%, and then an additional 16% whenever the enemy falls below 50% HP. This will also be giving a pretty large 40% attack buff as well if you manage to defeat an enemy. This is honestly going to be a super well-balanced light cone for her, but still, there are other options you can use, like swordplay, for example, right? Swordplay, the Sushang light cone. Now, the reason why this light cone is good is because you kind of want to do a single target focus with Topaz, right? her debtor state or her proof of debt's going to be targeting one main enemy. So you really want to make sure you're actually hitting that one main enemy the most you can, right? Because you don't have to rebuild those debuffs up and stuff like that, right? So with that in mind, using something like swordplay here actually incentivizes you to keep attacking that target. So you can kind of put Topaz on the main target or the main big bad that you're facing and do the most damage possible to them because you're using the swordplay light cone. Now, these are the 3 light cones that I recommend running on your Topaz. You can run other options here and there. It could work out, right? But these are the 3 main options that I run. Warriors and Blissful is actually really good if you plan on building follow-up characters in the future. It works for Fijao. It works for Dr. Ratio. It works for Topaz. Like, it works for just about any follow-up character. It can work for Moze. Like, this light cone is actually super, super good. I think one of the best light cones you can actually invest in the game right now. Dr. Ratio's light cone is really good too. Just an FYI, I think it actually holds more value than this light cone. But overall, for follow-up teams, this light cone holds a lot of value. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and now talk about what the best team she can be ran on is, because we've been talking about why she's meta defining, why she's meta breaking, all the light cones you can even run for, and her light cone helps out follow-up characters so much. And I think we can capitulate back to this chart here, right? Like I mentioned, I think she kind of sits in the middle ground right here, right? When realistically, that's not the full scenario. I think she sits in the middle ground here, I think she sits right here, and I think she sits right here. I think she's pretty even across the board on what she's able to do for each of these own categories here, summon state and reactive type of characters, right? Because with her being able to put 50% vulnerability on the enemy, and whenever your allies are doing follow-up attacks on that enemy, it just makes her even stronger because the enemy comes back to the front and does more damage on the enemy, and then your allies are doing more damage because she's putting such a huge 50% fucking debuff on the enemy. That buff might just be fatter than her ass. Now, maybe not Jane Doe's, but for sure her ass is fatter than, right? So this just makes her a really good all-around unit for just about any follow-up character. So you can use her on a team with Yunli, you can use her on a team with Clara, you can use her on a team with Aventurine, Jade, Dr. Ratio, you name it. Moze, Hunt March 7th, any of these characters you can use her with. She works well as a sub DPS and support in every single scenario that we just mentioned here. And not to mention, she kind of works with the general as well. So there are so many plethoras of teams you can run with her. But now, let's go ahead and talk about probably the moment you've been waiting for. When I tell you to subscribe to the channel, yeah, I scammed you again. We're talking about the relics now, but you should hit that subscribe button right now. If you don't, Topaz won't sit in your face. Why did I say that? That's so... I'm so sorry. Anyways, guys, we're going to talk about her best in slot relics now because a lot has changed in this department as well. So off rip, I'm going to give you guys what the most damaging 4-piece set for is. It's going to be a 4-piece Pioneer set. Now, this set is only the best set whenever you have all 3 debuffs on the enemy. So if you're running a team that can put 3 debuffs on the enemy, this is going to be bar none the best set because first of all, it's going to be increasing the damage dealt to enemies with debuffs on them, and then increasing that amount if there's debuffs on the enemy already, and then doubling that amount if you yourself put a debuff on the enemy, which she does with her proof of debt. That's a debuff. So that's 1 free debuff that you're getting, and if you have light cone, that's another debuff, and then if you have her E1, that is another debuff as well. So that's 3 debuffs on an enemy just from her kit if you have her E1 S1. You're basically getting this uptime for her buff for no charge at all, really. So this is a super, super good set to run, especially if you have her E1 S1. You can guaranteed get 3 debuffs on the enemy at all times, but that's not what I would say is the best set overall, right? Like the best overall set for her that can work in just about every single scenario, which is the same as we mentioned before, or the same as before, is the 4-piece Ashblade set, right? This is the de facto follow-up set, guys. It'll be giving you a 20% boost to your follow-up and then give you an attack boost based off of how many times you're actually hitting the enemy with a follow-up move. So this overall is just the de facto best set. You don't have to worry about getting debuffs. All you do is just use her on her own. There's nothing else you really have to worry about getting on the enemy, right? This kind of works for every team, whereas the Pioneer set might not necessarily work for every team. And then the really big thing about farming Ashblades in general, this will literally work for any of your other follow-up characters. Any of your other follow-up characters, even if they do 1 follow-up attack, will take use of a 2-piece set of this. Trust me, guys, it's a 20% increased damage to follow-up damage. So any of your follow-up characters can take use of this set. Like, for example, the 3rd best in slot set would probably be something like a 2-piece Ashblaze and 2-piece Pioneer. She inflicts a debuff, so that's a 12% damage bonus, and then she's going to be getting a 20% follow-up bonus. So these 2 stats you get for completely free. So that is going to be really good there. One thing I would like to mention, though, there's one downside that I don't think many people talk about with the Ashblaze set. Guys, her skill move and basic attack count as follow-up attacks. So that means every time she does a basic attack or a skill attack, it counts as a follow-up attack, meaning that's 1 hit you're putting on the enemy if you're using a basic attack for that matter, right? So you're resetting that buff down to 0. That means you have to use a follow-up attack again to get the buff back up to max, because this does reset every single time you use a skill or a basic attack. This resets with any of the abilities you use. So if you're using her for SP generation, it might just be better to use a 2-piece Ashblades with a 2-piece Pioneer. You would maybe get more damage out that way. But that's really all I have to say about the 4-piece sets. I want to talk about the Planer sets because this is where we've had the most change to. Because since I did the last video, we got Duran, and then we also got the Wondrous Banana Amusement Park, and both of these are some pretty decent sets for her. Obviously, best in slot set here, guys, is going to be Duran. Duran literally gives her a 25% crit damage boost, and is going to be giving her an additional 25% boost to follow-up, depending on how many times she hits follow-ups on the enemy, which is quite frequently with her. So this is going to be the overall best in slot set for her. Duran is absolutely amazing for her, but that's not the only set you can run, because if you're running her in the most meta teams right now, now in the game, or even with free-to-play characters, you're probably running her with a hunt character. And you might be struggling with that crit rate value. That's why Inazumo is another super good set to run, probably the second best in slot. And the reason why this is the second best in slot, if you're running another hunt character on the team, you're getting a 12% crit rate bonus for free. And then on top of that, you're getting a free 12% attack bonus. Crit-wise, this is a little bit better than Salsado because it's giving you 4% extra crit rate, which is basically an extra free rolls for your crit rate stat. So overall, really, really good set, especially if you're running here with Dr. Ratio, Fi Zhao, Mose, March 7th. Any of these characters here will be a super, super big improvement for what Topaz is able to put out in terms of damage. Third best in slot here, guys, is going to be Salsado. This is the most basic bitch set in the game. It gives you increased damage for follow-up attacks and ultimate damage. If you don't take use of that ultimate damage at all, you're only really getting the 15% increased damage bonus to follow-up attacks, which if you're running Duran, you're already getting 25% of it, so that just blows us out of the water. The really big thing here is it gives you 8% crit rate, which very nice. Free crit rate's always a nice thing to have. And then finally, guys, the Wondrous Banana Amusement Park. I genuinely think if you can get the crit rate on your character, this is probably the second best in slot overall, right? I still do think the 25% crit damage and the 25% extra to follow-up damage is a bit better than this because of how much crit damage she kind of gives herself already. But if you say spec into crit rate a lot more and got her crit rate up and you're missing out on a lot of crit damage, even though she gives herself quite a bit of crit damage in her kit, this right here is going to be giving her a 48% crit damage buff just to Noombi, right? So she gets 16% crit damage to her own attacks, right? So that means whatever her normal follow, but I guess basic attack would be, she gets 16% to that crit damage. But the big thing here is it's giving Noombi an extra 48% crit damage. And that's why I think this is probably the second best in slot, even over Inazumo. If your crit rate values are in check, and maybe say you're running low on that crit damage already, this could be a very, very good set to farm. I think it is second best in slot in my opinion. Let's go ahead and quit yapping and get into the main and substats now. Starting off with the main stats, guys, on the body, you're going to be wanting to either aim for crit rate or crit damage. On the feet, you're going to be wanting to aim for either speed or attack. On the planar sphere is going to be fire damage or attack percentage, and on the rope is going to be attack percentage. Let's go ahead and talk about these sub and recommended sets. Crit rate, crit damage, attack, and speed. These are the main things you want to hear, guys. Me, personally, I run an attack boot on mine because I know Noombi is based off of my other follow-up characters on the team, so I feel like this does make her useful using an attack boot because you don't really have to use her too much or as much on the team. If your team is hitting a lot of follow-up attacks, I would recommend running attack boot over speed boot just because the attack boost is actually giving you quite a bit more damage with your Noombi and with how many times your characters are using follow-up attacks. You don't really have to worry about her speed, right? Because Noombi completely relies on actions of other follow-up attacks. But overall, guys, I do think Topaz and Noombi is going to push the meta to new heights. I think she is going to be there when the meta switches and we get a new meta for summoning type characters or summoning type follow-up characters. And like I said, guys, if you want a new full video of me going over all of this right here, what you see on screen, then let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to go over and explain myself a bit more. We just only have so much time in this video, and I don't want to bore you. This is a build guide. I don't want to bore you guys with this right here. You came here to watch the build, but I wanted to give you some background context. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys in the next one later. Toodles! I'll throw Topaz on the screen one more time for you guys' enjoyment.